Hey, what's up, everybody? This is GT Media Reviews. This is your homie Jamal Baraka. How you doing today? I've come out of hibernation to record this video, and this one was kind of inspired by Wes and Doctor video about Comicsgate yesterday. Yesterday they had a video, and I'll link it in the description, going over the state of Comicsgate, why, what the hell's going on with Comicsgate. They provided some good insight into their perspective on the state of things. A lot of points got brought up about creators taking over the movement, fan factions, what they're looking for out of the movement, and if it's something that they want to follow anymore. They had a lot more points than that, and I don't want to diminish anything that they spoke about because it was a great video. But I wanted to talk about what got me into Comicsgate and just my general perspective on why Comicsgate is relevant to me. So back in 2015, I was getting back into comics. I'm a lifelong comic reader, and I'm specifically a Marvel reader. I've been reading Marvel my entire life. Before I could even walk, I was into Marvel because my brother and my cousins, they used to play the old Marvel TSR role-playing game, and I would watch them play with the little figurines or the little plastic paper cutouts, and before I could even walk, I would pretend to be Marvel characters. And this is like a true story. This is just like, I guess, my origin story here. And, for a while, I just fell off of Marvel. Have life. You have your life. You have kids, and I started making a little bit more money back in 2015, and I got back into comics. And because I could afford it, I started buying. The events from Marvel. So the first event that I got into was the assault on Pleasant Hill, or Avengers Standoff, and that was the one where the villains got mind wiped or something like that, and then they ended up in an asylum, and they started getting their memories back. But that's neither here nor there. I got the entire event. I got all the tie-in titles, and what the promise that was issued by Marvel was that this was going to be a big thing and it was going to be relevant. And almost a year later, most of you guys probably don't even remember Avengers Standoff. The lineup that was featured in the Avengers, they're all gone. It was Iron Man, Lady Thor, Old Man Captain America, Sam Wilson Captain America. And I thought the event was okay. It was decent. It wasn't bad. But then we got to, that rolled right over into Civil War 2. And then I got all those books and I got all the tie-ins. And on that, at that point, I started feeling like I was being ripped off by Marvel. Civil War 2 was a blatant cash grab. So you have like about 50 tie-ins. You have the main books was like 7 issues, and then you got about 20 to 50 tie-ins that go in there across the line. If you're a whale or a big Marvel fan and you buy all these books, you're spending hundreds of dollars on one tie-in. And then at the end of the day, Civil War 2 was a blatant cash grab. And then not only that, they killed War Machine at the beginning of it, and they essentially turned Carol Danvers into a villain. Now, the thing about Civil War 2 on top of all that is that nothing about that event stuck. So if you were reading Marvel back in 2015 and you're reading Marvel now, pretty much everything about that miniseries has either been retconned or is back to status quo that was before. Captain America is back to being Captain America. Most of the characters that have been race and gender swaps since then are back into their original roles or taking up new identities. So nothing about that event mattered. After Civil War, I think the next event we rolled right into, which picked up on the events of Pleasant Hill, was Secret Empire, and that was when Captain America turned evil. And at that point, I decided that I was going to back off of Marvel, which was sad for me because I had just got back into comics. But I noticed from a consumer standpoint, I was spending way more money than what I wanted to spend. And that's me, making decent money saying this is way too expensive. So I'm reading the main story. I'm reading all the tie-ins. And what pissed me off about Secret Empire was that Nick Spencer had spent all this time developing Sam Wilson into being Captain America. And then by the end of it, he finally earns the shield. It was a big storyline with Sam Wilson earning the shield of Captain America and taking on the mantle. And because of the backlash in the comics community on social media, Sam ended up going back to being Falcon. Evil Steve Rogers got retconned back into the regular Captain America, and it was obvious the ending had been changed for Secret Empire. So none of the events for that event, none of the events within that storyline stuck, and we ended up going back to status quo. And if you're a fan of Marvel and you're reading like Pleasant Hill, Civil War II, and then you're reading Secret Empire, you've spent hundreds or possibly thousands of dollars on these comics, and nothing mattered. So it was a waste of your money. And then from a consumer's perspective, you can really, stepping back from it, you can see that Marvel it has a con game going. It's a huge ripoff. So while that was going on, DC came out with DC Rebirth, and they launched their titles at $2.99. So as opposed to Marvel's $3.99, I know it's not a big deal, but at some point it's like, okay, well, I'm reading this book for $2.99 and I'm reading this one for $4.99, $3.99 and up. Let me check out these cheaper books. And the DC books were great. And the price point was at a point where if something came out, at $2.99 and the cover looks good, I may, stop and read it and check it out because it's at a reasonable price point. So I've gradually stopped reading Marvel, but I was angry at the publisher because it had ripped me off. I felt like I was ripped off by Marvel. That's when I started hearing about Comicsgate and a lot of the issues that were going on with Comicsgate as far as like the characters being race swapped, people being in the comic books that didn't have much experience or talent. I really didn't. I agree with that part of it, but my problem was where I split with the traditional thinking on Comicsgate and the rhetoric that was surrounding the movement was that I didn't feel that the race and gender swaps was really that big of a deal. It became an issue when you have a book that you want to read, a character that you want to read, is not even available to read and is swapped out by somebody that you don't know or care about. A good example would have been like Riri Williams. I think most fans would be interested in seeing Iron Man with a sidekick or supporting character that is a person of color that would eventually develop into their own role as a superhero. We've seen that before. That's exactly what War Machine is. If you picked up a younger sidekick or a younger character and that developed into their own character and into their own superhero, I don't think the community would have had much of a problem. But what happened with Marvel was Marvel came in and steamrolled a lot of their characters. Like you had Thor gone, you had Captain America gone, you had the X-Men were basically written out for the Inhumans. You had the Hulk was, what the hell was going on with the Hulk? I don't even remember. But you had a lot of the characters in Marvel were either swapped out or just weren't available. And rather than, giving a reasonable answer for why these characters were swapped out, it was all because of either diversity. Oh, Wolverine was another one. Wolverine was swapped out from X-23. I'm sure the poster's around. I don't feel like looking for it. But once that happened, you had a lot of people pissed off because the characters they were looking to read, the fans, were told that they were either racist, sexist, or misogynist because they didn't agree with the changes that were happening at Marvel. None of that was the case, but if you want to read Iron Man and Iron Man is not in the book, what are you supposed to read? You're being forced to read Ironheart or Riri Williams. If you want to read, Thor Odinson and Thor, and he's not Thor anymore, you're forced to read Jane Foster Thor. If you don't want to read that, then what are you supposed to do? So at that point, I can understand why the fan community was upset. I don't have a problem with it. My solution for Marvel at the time was just, put the old characters in books, put the new characters in books, and then have the fans decide what they want to read. That's a solution that I think would have worked for everybody. But Marvel didn't do that. They used their contractors or the writers and artists to go out there and attack the fans just for saying, hey, I don't like what you guys are doing. And it created a false narrative. So getting back to myself, I'm reading DC Rebirth. I'm enjoying DC Rebirth. I gradually stopped reading Marvel, but I kept up with the events and everything that was going on around it. And then usually, because I'm making friends in the Comicsgate community, I just decided that I was Comicsgate because I'm not reading Marvel. I'm picking up DC, so I'm learning about characters that I hadn't really read before. I've been a lifelong Marvel fan. I'm also picking up indie comics, not Comicsgate books yet, but I'm reading indie comics that I never would have picked up before. So during this time, I picked up Beauty from Image. I picked up Unnatural from Unnatural from Image Comics. I'm reading Southern Bastards from Image. I'm reading the Comicsgate books. I got Earthworm Jim. I got Bigfoot Bill. I got Cyber Frog. I'm backing a lot of their projects, Jawbreakers. And when the books are done and they're shipped out, I'm enjoying those books. But during that time, I created my blog, which I have up on the screen. And I just started reviewing comics. And I know that, blogs are out of print or out of date or whatever, but I made my blog and I made my YouTube channel, and I already had a platform that had 250,000 followers on Facebook. But because of the negative backlash to Comicsgate, I figured I would keep this community separate from that one. So as far as what Comicsgate means to me, Comicsgate is a way of holding the mainstream comics industry and publishers accountable for the actions that they take. A few weeks ago, Marvel put out Marvel Incoming. And Marvel Incoming was a 100-page book that basically boiled down to being a preview book. Marvel gives out preview books every week when I go to my comic shop. And, they just give you a brief synopsis of a story that's coming up, and then it's done. Marvel decided to do 100 pages advertisement, but it was just basically a preview book. They also have their Dawn of X titles, which started out as House of X, Powers of X, Powers of 10. And we got about 4 Dawn of X titles, but looking into the future, we have 12 X-Men books that are coming, all of which are going to be about $3.99 each and up. So, and then they're advertising that there's going to be a huge event by the end of the year tying all these books together. Now, I've already mentioned earlier in the video that, these events tend to not really matter in the long run or the grand scheme of things. So what Marvel is depending on you doing is buying all of these books, spending hundreds of dollars, and what will happen is things may be changed for a few months, but what they'll do is they'll go back and either reboot the line, relaunch the series with a new number one, with a new creative team, and charge higher prices for these books. I mean, Marvel is really scummy on a lot of different levels. And part of what I feel about Comicsgate is that it's holding mainstream publishers accountable for this stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be racist or sexist or anything like that. It's just that things are going on in the industry that Comicsgate is in a unique position to be able to hold mainstream publishers together. You aren't going to get that from Bleeding Cool or CBR or anything like that. You have independent creators out here that are creating new comics, and they're new voices out here that are creating comics that are more like the books that we used to read and enjoy that aren't trying to rip you off. These Comicsgate books cost a little bit more, but they aren't ripping you. They're not trying to rip you off. It's just that comics cost more to make and make a profit off of when you're working independently than if you're under Marvel or DC. So what I decided to do with my blog and with my YouTube channel and just my voice on social media is just call out and say, hey, Comicsgate isn't perfect. It's made up of fans, and fans is short for fanatics. So some voices in the community are going to be louder and possibly toxic, and other voices are going to be, more nuanced and able to make a case for one side or another. But the thing is, Comicsgate is a community. So it's not perfect, but I feel like it's the best way to combat some things that's going on in the industry that needs to be pointed out. So whether you're OG Comicsgate and you're Comicsgate on the creator side of it, we all have a part to play, because Comicsgate is, from creator perspective, is creating a lot of independent voices in comics that you would have never seen before out here. Like when you see Death Sworn, or you see Sovereign, or you see Cyberfrog making a resurgence back into the industry. You see Jawbreakers by Richard Myers. These are things that you wouldn't have got in the mainstream comics. And with Jawbreakers, we almost didn't get it at all because of Mark Waid and trying to blacklist, stop your boy Zach from getting into comic book stores. And Jawbreakers isn't even a controversial book. But this is what was happening with the mainstream. The mainstream had overreached and said that the creators weren't being allowed to create. And this, and Richard went on ahead and put out his book, and Comicsgate came together and supported him. Same thing with Ethan Van Sciver. Ethan Van Sciver got blacklisted by DC Comics for being conservative. He comes out and gets into Comicsgate. Comicsgate supports him. And Comicsgate supports a lot of independent creators and voices. And that's important. I feel like that's important. And it can be important for indie comics out here. You have a lot of indie books that are great. Like I'm reading right now, it's a book that's on my blog. It's called Safe Sex. I just happened to pick it up in my local comic shop. It's a great friggin' book, but you probably don't know it. You probably never seen it or heard about it because nobody talks about independent comics. Everything's Marvel and DC, but it's bigger than that. There's a lot more comics out there than the mainstream. And then I feel like Comicsgate is one of the avenues where you can get voices out there about projects that you would have just never heard about. So when I'm talking about Dawn of X, I can still turn around and say, hey, you need to check out Safe Sex or Unnatural or even The Lone Ranger from mainstream creators like Mark Russell or Second Coming. You aren't even going to hear the mainstream talk about these books that they're publishing. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover in this video, but I just wanted to say that I still support Comicsgate. I am Comicsgate. I don't make a big deal about certain aspects of Comicsgate because I try not to get too deep in the weeds about the factioning and stuff like that. Yes, I know about War Campaign. Yes, I know about the Cherries. I know there's toxic voices on both sides, and I try to block those out because a lot of Comicsgate right now and a lot of the voices in Comicsgate right now are basically, I'm not going to say a cult, but Comicsgate on some level has turned into a cult of personality. And, whether you're a fan of Ethan Van Sciver or you're a fan of Doug Snaple or you're a fan of Mike S. Miller or even, Edwin Boyette, and these guys don't like each other. And what I'm noticing with the creator side of it or the content creator side of it is they've split the fan base or the Comicsgate community into camps, whether they want to admit to it or they own up to it or whether they even recognize it. They've split the Comicsgate community into camps based around the personality of those creators. And, some people can, if you're a fan of pro wrestling, that's Thinking Critical used a wrestling analogy. If you know pro wrestling, you know that they have, factions. They have you have heel turns, face turns, and stuff like that. But what I think with this is you have the fans don't realize that a lot of the beefs out there are personal beefs, and they're getting caught up and losing sight of, I don't have to jump in and defend Ethan Van Sciver. Ethan is a grown-ass man. I don't have to jump in and defend Doug TenNapel. Doug TenNapel is grown. His beef with Ethan is personal. That has nothing to do with me. I'm just a fan. I'm a consumer. I actually work on my own comics on the side. I don't have to come in and defend Mike S. Miller because he said something or anything like that. These guys are beefing with each other over stuff that was said and done on their streams. They can take care of themselves. What I'll say from my perspective is that as a fan, it has nothing to do with me. Yes, I see it. I recognize it. And if somebody in Comicsgate is doing something to harass you, block them, mute them, keep it moving. You don't have to sit back and engage. And this is for anybody on social media, whether you're on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, wherever. There's toxic people on social media carrying flags and banners, whether it's, comics, video games, or politics. They carry these flags and they have these voices, and you're not going to agree with them all the time. And the minute they come at you and attack them, disengage, block, mute, or whatever. As a fan, you're not going to get hundreds of people coming after you, and the voices may seem like they're more than what they are. You may have 10 accounts coming after you talking shit, but it's like 10 accounts. Just block and mute all of them. And if they give you another fake profile, block them too, and just keep doing it. But a lot of the blanket calling Comicsgate a cult or calling the community toxic or all that kind of stuff, the waving the flag and painting everybody with the same brush is what created Comicsgate in the first place. And when creators are saying that Comicsgate is toxic or anybody in the community that supports the community is or it's a drag on them or something stupid like that, what you're doing is you're just creating an atmosphere where people are forced to choose sides, and really, they don't have to choose sides, but it's not a real argument. It's coming from somebody that has stepped away from the community that for a personal reason, because of a personal beef, but we're all getting caught in the middle of it. So when you see Mike S. Miller or Doug TenNapel or Edwin Boyette saying that Comicsgate is a cult or something that you don't want to be affiliated with because of War Campaign, do you really believe that Doug TenNapel or Mike or the Comic Book Hut, that their channels have, or that their personalities have changed since they left Comicsgate? And I think if you look at yourself and you look at the situation, you don't really see much of a change other than the channels that they appear on. They're still Comicsgate. They're just mad at Ethan. They're just mad at War Campaign. They're just mad about something that's going on Twitter or social media. So that's my piece. I'm not going to say negative about anybody that I mentioned in this video. I'm a big fan of Doug TenNapel. I'm a big fan of Ethan Van Sciver. I just picked up a book from Mike S. Miller. I support everybody as creators. I may not follow them as closely as I used to because of the situation surrounding Comicsgate, but I wish all of them the best, and I wish all of our independent creators in Comicsgate the best. I appreciate all of the friends that I've developed over the past year or two. I swear, when I'm in real life and on Facebook, a lot of the people I run into are all liberals, or they're all, one political ideology. And on Twitter, and especially around Comicsgate, you see a lot of conservative voices. You see a lot of interaction with people that you normally wouldn't interact with on other platforms. So I appreciate Comicsgate for that. On that note, I'm going to close this out. This has been a long-ass video, and I don't record. I'm not even sure how the sound quality sounds. If you get a chance, check out Tina Horn's Safe Sex, though. It's a really great book, and I just started reading it last week. It's a very liberal book. It's a very progressive liberal book. Basically 1984 with sex workers or whatever. That's what my title is. And I appreciate you taking this time with me. You can subscribe to my channel. You can check me out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, GT Media Reviews, or you can just respond to this video and just let me know what you think. I know I put a lot of information out here, and a lot of it's off the cuff. I didn't write this down, but it was on my mind for a long time. Have a great one, and subscribe. Peace.